Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're doing something a little different. We're taking a grade 12 Islamic studies textbook and breaking down its core lessons into a super clear visual journey for you.
So yeah, for this entire explainer, we're sticking to just this one textbook. It's going to be our single source for this whole overview. All right, you ready? Let's dive right in. Okay, so first things first. The textbook really sets the stage by taking us back in time. It paints a picture of the social and, the moral landscape of Arabia right before Islam.
And the textbook? It really doesn't pull any punches here. It paints a pretty stark picture of that era. It describes a society where, it says, life was cheap and major conflicts could just ignite over the most trivial things. The book also gets into certain marriage customs of the time that it frames as being morally compromised, even comparing some of them to prostitution.
But, it wasn't all just chaos. The book highlights this really crucial counterexample, an alliance they called Hulf al-Fadul. Now, this was a pact made specifically to protect the most vulnerable people. We're talking orphans, widows, travelers. And what's so significant here, what the textbook really wants us to see, is that this impulse for justice was already there. It was like a homegrown thing, a foundation that existed even before the main events of the faith came into the picture.
So with that social context as the backdrop, we get to the book's central focus, the Prophet Muhammad and the revelation of the Quran.
The book spends a good bit of time on his character, really noting his reputation for being truthful. And it was this integrity, the text explains, that impressed his employer, a successful merchant named Khadija. And here's a cool twist that went against the norms of the time. She was the one who initiated the marriage proposal to him.
From the Prophet, the book then turns to the scripture itself, but not just as a text, but as a physical object with its own incredible history. It traces the journey of one famous early copy of the Quran, showing how this manuscript survived and traveled across empires and centuries, all the way from Central Asia to Russia and then back again.
The book also has this really interesting section on what it calls medical miracles. It presents this list of topics, everything from the uniqueness of fingerprints to the healing properties of honey, as examples of scientific knowledge that it says was revealed in the Quran long before being discovered by modern science.
Okay, so now let's explore the core theology presented in the book. We're going to be focusing on the world beyond what we can physically see. This part's pretty fascinating. The textbook basically gives us a kind of, an organizational chart for the celestial world. It outlines the very specific, distinct roles of key angels. So you have Israfil, who signals the day of resurrection, Mikhail, who manages provisions like rain, and of course, the angel of death, who's responsible for taking souls. And the book makes a very specific point to clarify something. It notes that while the name Azrael is really popularly used for the angel of death, that specific name isn't actually found in the two primary sources, not in the Quran and not in the authenticated sayings and traditions of the Prophet, which are known as the Hadith. Then the book presents a core argument for why an afterlife is so necessary. The logic it presents is that this world is imperfectly just, right? Good deeds aren't always rewarding, and criminals sometimes get away with things. So, according to the text, a life after death is absolutely essential for ultimate fairness and divine justice to be served. So, how do all these beliefs actually translate into daily actions? Well, the textbook outlines several key practices to show just that. A huge celebration is Eid al-Fitr. And as the textbook explains, the name itself tells you everything you need to know. Fitr comes from a root word that means to break. So this is the great festival celebrating the end of the month-long fast of Ramadan. The book also details specific exemptions from fasting, making it clear that certain people, like the sick, travelers, or pregnant women, can postpone their fast if it poses a risk to their health. It really highlights a practical focus on a person's well-being. The book also defines the specific mourning period for a widow, which is known as Hidad. It's described as a 4-month and 10-day period where she abstains from things that would invite marriage proposals, really allowing for a dedicated time of grief and transition. All right, finally, the textbook really zooms out and broadens the scope to explain a universal concept that's right there at the heart of its message. And this is where it gets really interesting. The book introduces this fascinating distinction between Muslim with a capital M versus Muslim with a lowercase m. Now, the first one refers to a human follower of the faith, but that second one, with the lowercase m, that has a much broader universal meaning. According to this concept, everything in the universe is in a state of Muslim or submission to the divine will.
a rock obeying gravity, a planet staying in its orbit, an animal following its instincts. The textbook describes all of these as submitting to the natural laws established by the Creator.
So, the crucial point the textbook is making here is that the ultimate goal of the scripture isn't just about personal salvation, it's about a collective one. The text explicitly states that a final objective of the Quran is to guide all of humanity toward establishing world peace.
And that leaves us with a really powerful final question, one drawn directly from the textbook's own conclusion. If the ultimate objective of this scripture is world peace, what would that world actually look like in practice? It's a pretty profound idea to end on.